Whenever you're ready, David.
Okay, sure. Let's get started. No, some of the folks usually here haven't quite showed up yet, but that's fine. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome again, everybody, for our weekly conversation. David starts again with Cooperative Strategies in partnership with the National Council on School Facilities. And today we are very excited to talk with Dr. David Steiner on the theme of this learning gap that we know is unfolding before us. How to frame thinking about it, how to, as importantly, frame addressing it. And I know we've typically focused and do focus in these conversations a lot on the operations side of the fence, on school operations and capital and those kinds of things. But for last week and the next here and today, talking on from the academics house on what's unfolding before us in COVID and what can we do about it? How should we think about it? And then for us on the operations side, it's going to be how do we do what's best? How do we identify what's best intervention? And then how do we scale that? How do we fund that? How do we organize around that to get it done? And so we're really excited again to have Dr. Steiner with us. Dr. Steiner is the executive director of Johns Hopkins Institute for Educational Policy and a professor. He's served on the board for Maryland State Board of Education. And you can see through the brief form resume is even a lot to chew on. And as a former New York State Commissioner for the state of New York, he's been educated on both sides of the pond, as we'd like to say, and is a speaker on both. And we're honored to have the time and conversation with him today to really talk about learning loss, high quality assessments, high quality curriculum, high quality interventions, and just how we can think and approach for that. So I am going to be brief, step out of the way. And as we do every week in these conversations, go ahead and populate your questions and comments in the chat box if you can. And then we will address them as we come. And this will be co-moderated as well with my partner based at our Colorado office, Susan Miller, with Cooperative Strategies, who also sits as a board member, sitting board member as well. So David, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And thanks everyone for joining. David, are you releasing your screen?
I will right now.
Great. Okay, I will share mine. Here we go. Hope everyone can see it.
Yeah.
Great. So I want to go fairly quickly. I'm much more interested in your questions and discussion than in listening to the sound of my own voice. But I do want to set a little bit of context here. This is data from TNTP and their Opportunity Myth report. Essentially what I want to say here, and I'm going to make some bold claims, and please do push back in the discussion period. But here we go. America underteaches its students more so than any other advanced industrialized country. What do I mean by that? I mean that we challenge them less at every grade level. We are one of the few countries where in every grade students learn less than they do in the year before, substantially so as we get into high school. And we lie to ourselves, which is as pernicious. We have almost 3/4 of our students succeeding on their assignments, as you can see on the screen. And yet only 17% of those assignments, on which 71% succeed, are at grade level. So if you think about it, the vast majority of work we give to our students is below grade level, where grade level is modestly linked to our state standards. That is an astonishing fact. And on the bottom box, just putting it another way, this is for average. This is across all students, wealthy, poor, in between. We're saying that about 6 months of class time is spent on materials that are below or way below grade level. That's the reality of American education. It's not a happy place to start, but it's a really important place to start. This gets worse. It gets worse because as we look at our students of color and low income, they experience classrooms which have even rarer access to the grade level materials. As you can see in the data here, if you're white, you're likely to have 4 times as much exposure to that grade level resources than your African-American, Hispanic, or poor peers. And that really means, if you remember that 17% figure, this is astonishing, but for very many African-American students, they never get access to grade level materials. I mean, not ever, not from K through 12. So that is the backdrop I want to keep in mind as we dig into today's topic, and you'll see that it is very relevant to our discussion. This is a wonkish, nerdish graphic, which I'm going to keep up for a while, but don't worry, I'm going to explain it very quickly. This is from NWAA, which does a big map assessment you may have heard of, has a big research arm. And essentially, this was their forecast of what COVID means. COVID, of course, means that a lot of children, vast majority, went online for months. Then we had the summer holiday. Then we've got this very muddled, mixed best effort return, where many of our poorest children are not in school, they're at home, their access to internet is bumpy. This is just a forecast until this last September 1st. So you can extrapolate based on what you know about what's going on today. But to put this in a nutshell, the younger you are, the worse it's been for COVID. I'm going to come back to real numbers in a moment. But basically, if you look at the dotted lines on the right-hand side after school closure, and look at the bottom dotted line in each of the grade level cases, what this is really saying is that for your 3rd grade student who was at a certain performance level on September 1 of 2019, that student is almost back to that level by September 1, 2020, right, a month ago. Let me say that again, because it's a staggering prediction. What it's saying is that because of the combination of COVID and summer melt always occurs, even on a good year. COVID is like that negative accelerator. It's made it exponentially worse. So what we're seeing here is that if you put summer melt and COVID together, and you're an average 3rd grader, again, average, you will probably have started school, whether online or in person, a month ago, with almost no more learning than you started with last year. Now, as we go up the grade levels, you see that it isn't as bad, right? So if we look, the learning losses just aren't as great as we go up the chart. But lest we take any comfort from that, remember what I said 5 minutes ago. Our higher grade level students are learning less. If you learn less, there's less to forget. So they've forgotten just as much of less learning. Hardly a very happy conclusion. And the last slide I want to present before I get into my own material is that there's a massive illusion taking place, or delusion, among American parents because of the messages we have been giving them about their children. As you can see, 92 or 93% of American parents believe that their own children are above grade level, not at grade level. And what's even more distressing is that African American and Hispanic parents are no different from white parents. Remember, we know that their children by 12th grade, on average, are between 2 and 3 grade levels behind their white peers by 12th grade. And yet they, in equal percentages to white parents, believe in huge numbers, great majority of them, 92, 93%, that their children are above grade level. That's not because they're making a mistake. It's because they're listening to what we as educators are saying. Now, they've understood that there is some catch up. And I'm going to come back to that important point. They do understand that because of COVID, a third of them believe that their children will need catch up. Actually, the figure is well over double that as compared to a normal year. But the crucial point here is that there's this mythology based on the fact that 83% of their children are getting B's or better, that their kids are above grade level, when we know that only 17% of them have access to grade level material, and the vast majority of African American, Hispanic children, poor children, don't even meet that by any stretch of the imagination. So that's the backdrop. We've got this huge, huge existing achievement gap. We've got an illusion or delusion on the part of parents that their kids are okay. And then we've got COVID, which is removing up to a year of learning as of right now. And as of right now, millions of children are still getting online education of one kind or another, and we're all doing our best. But in a place like Baltimore, where I'm sitting today talking to you from, it's not learning. It's a scatter diagram, some schools, some teachers, some classes, some effort. Other schools, other classrooms, it's been catastrophic, despite everyone's best effort. And I do want to underline that. So faced with this situation as a nation, you might say to me, well, yes, David, but the data you've been giving us is speculative, right? And that's true. Going back to this graphic, this was a forecast. We don't have detailed results yet. I have seen data from various assessments which has not been made public. So please understand that I've seen that in what I'm about to tell you. But I can tell you that Holland has released results and Belgium has released results. Belgian results have just been made public. Now, Belgium, while it had very bad COVID for a while, is a very small, well-organized country, and they've gotten their kids back to face-to-face schooling by and large. Their melt rates were almost exactly on par with the NAEP forecast, with the NWEA forecasts. That's real data, not predictive data. They've had effect size decreases of 0.30, 0.29 to be exact. That is enormous, right? That is absolutely enormous. That is a year's worth of learning at high school. So this is no longer speculative. From a very well-organized country that has everyone back in school, they're dealing with a crisis. We're dealing with a major crisis because we are building a crisis on a crisis of achievement gap. All right, so that's the bad news. And I don't want to pretend, in the next 15 minutes that I can wave a magic wand. That would be completely wonderful and equally absurd. But what I can say is that our go-to reflex in this situation is to do remediation, right? Kids are 3 years behind. What does America do? It says, oh my goodness, we better teach them the stuff they missed 3 years ago or 2 years ago or even a year ago. What else can we do? One thing the research is clear about, remediation, I'm going to be equally blunt as I was in the beginning, remediation doesn't close achievement gaps. I repeat, it doesn't, at no age level, including community college, right? It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Let's think about that for 10 seconds. You are psychologically saying to students, you deserve to be taught as if you're 2 years younger than your age group. We'll give you dumbed down material. We are going to go back to the stuff you never mastered, right? You can't cope with this, with your age level material. Off you go. We're going to separate you, or we're not even going to separate you. We're just going to infantilize you, right? By teaching you stuff that was for much younger children. It is discouraging, dispiriting. It is covered by the nice rhetoric of meet you where you are. which in fact means, in practice, meet you where you are and keep you where you are, because very little progress, I'm speaking averages and nationally, is made. Now, one of the underspoken findings in American research, because no one will say it, is that if you look at the highest performing public schools, and I do include public charter schools here, and you ask what is the single practice that most distinguishes the very top performing high schools for high needs kids, we're talking for minority poor kids, what do the top schools do that the rest of the schools just don't do? And the answer is they don't remediate, they accelerate. And I'm going to say a few words about what that means. What it means is that faced with children who are below grade level in, let us say, mathematics, they don't try to teach them all the skills they missed 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or a year ago. They take a completely different approach. They say tomorrow's lesson is on adding unlike fractions. Now, we have done a diagnostic test and we know which children have missed which skills in being ready for tomorrow's lesson, or even better, for next Monday's lesson, when today is the previous Monday, right? We know where they are on those prerequisite skills. What do? We teach them only what they absolutely need so that next Monday they can join the whole class at the grade level instruction on adding unlike fractions. We don't worry about the 30 other skills they missed. We worry about just in time, just needed skill for this lesson so they can be at grade level. And that's what they do. And how do they do it? They do it with a combination of approaches. First, instead of response to intervention, RTI, being a remedial sort of holding pen for stuff that was missed years ago, it is used to absolutely hone in laser-like on the 2 or 3 skills that are the must-master skills for that Monday class. Second, they don't remove the children from their grade level classrooms. They do some differentiation in that whole class instruction so that some children are getting reinforcement on the skills they need to participate in that day's instruction. So they never, ever segregate the children completely. They use extra time, and this involves, I know, many of your interests around how do you logistically organize for that, and I'll come back to it, but they use extra time and classroom time to ensure that I as a child who is missing, right, a critical gap of skills, perhaps struggling with halves, in this particular case, right, of adding unlike fractions, that skill will be taught to me just in time, and I will stay with my peers. This is easier for me to describe in 10 minutes than for school teachers to do, particularly since we haven't trained them to do it in our schools of education. And I speak here as the former 8-year dean of a very large school of education, which when I arrived taught remediation, like everywhere else. So it's not so simple. You first of all have to get the teachers to believe that this is possible. They just don't at the beginning. Not their fault. They've been, as it were, mindseted to not believe, no matter what the rhetoric is. Then you have to organize, right? You may need to put different groups of children into different learning pods at different points in the day with different kinds of instruction geared to those crucial skills they didn't get. That takes logistical organization. It takes organization of perhaps using staff as well as teachers, right? Other staff where they can be supervised by teachers, right? Really high performing schools use everybody. all the adults where they can to make this happen, right? It may involve some after school work, not, arts and crafts, however wonderful that is, and it is wonderful, but making sure I can do whole number operations, right, if that's the skill I need. And there have to be spaces for that, and there have to be organizational issues, and it's all hands on deck. And that is really difficult for schools that have fixed timetables and very rigid thinking, and it's take half the class and give it RTI, and this is the way RTI works, and it's always worked that way, and it will always work that way till the end of time. Well, it can't, because the result of that kind of brute remediation is, again, the learning gaps that we have in this country, which are tragic, and which COVID have made worse. The problems here, the difficulties here are real, and I want to talk about them and not underestimate them. I've talked about the mindset, and that has to do with years of assumption that because my children came into the classroom well behind, there is no way I'm going to be able to teach them grade level material. But there is. I'll give you real examples. So let us say that you are going to teach the Giver in a piece on utopia. And it's a 7th grade text, and you've got a whole bunch of students who are at 5th grade reading levels. These are real cases in Baltimore today, right? What do? Well, you could abandon the Giver and give them a text at the lexical level that they are able to read and put them into RTI and remediation. And if you're lucky, they'll come out reading at a slightly better 5th grade level, right, than a worse 5th grade level at the end of the year. Or you scaffold like heck and you drill on the vocabulary, on the story, you use other modalities, movies, audiobooks, whatever it takes to make the Giver accessible to that age group that should be reading it. That's an ELA example rather than a math example, because I want to make the point that this is not specific to a subject matter. The skills that are missed are different, of course, but the fundamental strategy has to be the same. And so just as in math, we hone in on those missing skills that are absolutely required, so in the case of an ELA text, we do not dumb it down, we do not remove it, we do not replace it with a text that will embarrass the children because it will be written at a story level for which they're much too mature. We scaffold, we focus, we get them there. So this I think is truly an important shift of focus for American education. And what does it depend on? Above all, beyond the mindset, it depends on diagnostics, right? You should not be guessing. Whether you can say to yourself, well, last year's state test, my kids on average, I've seen the scores in math and ELA, they're 2 years behind. All right, end of story, off to remediation we all go. No, you need diagnostics that pinpoint the actual skill gaps against the objectives of this year's learning. Now, given COVID, rightly, we must expect to teach less, not worse, not lower stuff, but less of the grade level material, given the realities on the ground. Organizations like Student Achievement Partners and others have done this for us. They have thinned out this year's Common Core, other standards, learning expectations, simplified them, not dumbed them down, but simplified them and made them fewer. So we need diagnostics, we need realism about what we are hoping to teach, and then we need to match the diagnostics against our learning objectives. Then we can match our intervention to an accelerated effort to bring those skills, those crucial missed skills, to our children. Now, this depends on the diagnostics. And there are diagnostics and there are diagnostics. Many, many schools still have teachers making up their own. The best curriculum, the green-lighted Ed Reports curriculum, what we call HQIM, high quality instructional materials, now often come with their own diagnostics. And some of them have done it explicitly given the COVID crisis. So if you look at things like Zern in math, a very high-rated curriculum, or Eureka, or you look at Wit and Wisdom, or you look at guidebooks, they now come with normed, referenced diagnostics as assessments that will help teachers and schools pinpoint those crucial skills, those entry-level skills for the grade level knowledge. I want to stress, and I'm coming towards the close of my remarks, but I want to stress that this is not a one teacher effort. It won't work that way. This requires the superintendent's support, the chief academic officer's support. This requires logistical support. These are whole school efforts to say, we are focused on ensuring that we don't perpetuate this agonizing, almost permanent learning gap that has been bequeathed to us by American education. We are going to organize our school around this crucial effort to accelerate our children, so that instead of ratcheting down each year, so that we hand off to the next year's teacher a child and children even further behind, which is what we have now. Learning gaps increase over the grade levels in America. They don't shrink. The best proof there is, sadly, of the failure of remediation. So instead of handing over that ratcheted down performance, we're going to hand up, right? We're going to hand to the next grade a smaller learning gap. I'm not saying that every effort will succeed. I am not saying that every child will manage to accelerate to every grade level lesson. I am saying you do far better by children overall, far better by making that effort than by not making that effort, right? I am not saying that the top schools, public schools in this country that are serving highest needs children get every one of their children, right, to proficiency. But by goodness, the top schools do very close to that, very close to that. And it's not like they're all schools that don't backfill. I want to address that because it's come up in earlier discussions. I am not talking about charter schools, and there are fewer of them than there used to be, who take children and never take children in grades 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? Who just take them at K, some of them disappear, and the same kids who are left get tested at grade 5. I'm talking about schools like Achievement First that backfill every year. And so every year they face children who come in 2, 3 grade levels behind. And yet they get them at the 85th, 90th percentile level to that grade level performance. This can be done, but it takes a unity of purpose. It takes a mindset shift. It takes a logistical support. It takes high quality curriculum. It takes diagnostics. The saddest thing that I want to report is that everything I've just said in the last 20 seconds is considered the basic structure of public education in other countries, right? I mean, they assume that this is SOP, standard operating procedure, right? We have developed a system that is paved with good intentions. Again, I want to make this very clear before I close. Remediation is not done by evil people. Everyone wants to do right by children. We wouldn't be in this work if we didn't. They mean well, and it sounds right. Meet the child where she is, right? It sounds exactly ethically right. It takes a big effort of understanding, I have found, and belief to say, yes, meet them where they are and don't stay there for a moment. Because every moment you stay there, you're putting in concrete that learning gap. You are essentially stabilizing that learning gap. And you're eventually going to make it worse because of the depression you create for students and the sense that they'll never catch up. And let me actually close with a real story about what this means. In Baltimore, we have a graduation rate that's in the 70th percentile, right? Even though our African Americans constitute about 90% of our students, K-12, and about 14% of those African Americans actually achieve proficiency on the state tests. Don't ask me how that works, right? 14% proficiency, 75% graduation rate. Then many of them go on to the local community college where they're remediated, right? Because they must be, because they are way below, because only 15, 14% of them actually graduated with proficiency. The 3-year graduation rate in the local Baltimore community college is about 10%. That is the final outcome of this whole current structure. All that we do is shunt them along, remediate, remediate, remediate. And we chuck them out the other side with no degree, debt, and very few marketable skills. So I wanted to stop somewhere more cheerful. I didn't mean to stop there, but so it seems by the clock. I do want to leave us time for discussion and conversation. So David, if that's a fair point to stop, I will.
Yeah.
And desist.
No, that's great. And then let's pick up in conversation. As we go to the conversation in chat, and please, folks, as you have thoughts, questions, comments, please put them in now, and we'll get to that. I was thinking, David, in my former life, I ran a tutoring company for 8 years, and I focused mainly on urban schools, serving kids in one-on-one instruction. And I would, send teachers and do one-on-one. And when I would do our diagnostics, our pre-assessments, they, on average, my students every year were 2.5 grade levels behind.
Right.
And it just, as I was listening to the presentation, it brought me back to that. And the frequent conversation where I would have calls, it's for folks to say, my 9th grader is struggling in algebra. And it got to the point where I would say, so we're going to have them do adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, fractions, decimals, and exponents, and then they'll be fine. Like this is what, over time, just seeing this pattern emerge over and over again, just needed those skill sets, and boom, then they were doing fine. But there's these core content there, not doing the entire 5th grade over again, but hitting those things. And it just, anyway, just so for proof text, interesting context from what you're saying, and I appreciate that. Some of the questions in the chat, I'm going to get to. What about some countries? One of the questions there was, some African countries are choosing to simply have their students restart this year in the same grade they were. What do you see are the pros and cons of looking at repeating a year? I think I know this question came early in your presentation, so I surmise I think I know where you're going to go with it, but I'd like you to field it if you don't mind.
Yeah, holding students back, now bracketing COVID for a moment, is even worse than remediation, right? There's very few things that educational researchers agree on 100%. There are probably only 2. Right? One is that phonics and phonemic awareness are critical for learning to read. And the second is that holding students back doesn't work. There are tiny cases where it works very briefly for a few months, but the long-term effects are equally bad. And it's really for the same reason. You're being told, right, you're not capable of being your own age, right? It's like being told by a parent, you're too young, right? But my sister was allowed to do this, right? When she was my age, not you, right? You don't have the maturity, you don't have, so that thing. If it's done system-wide, you've got a problem logistically, right? Because you can't hold back the kindergartners. I mean, you have double size, right? You've got a major logistical nightmare. I would much prefer, based on the research, to simplify this year's targets, right? I'd much prefer to say, and by the way, in America, we try to teach too much anyway, right? When the work was done around TIMSS, the Third International Math and Science Study, what was found was that the Japanese, Southern Koreans, others taught fewer than half the number of topics we did, right, in middle and high school in science and math. So we go too quickly at an inch deep. Slow down, pick a small number of grade level targets, and accelerate towards those targets would be, on the basis of the research, would be my counsel. I just think the other is a recipe for a mess, to put it a technical term on it.
So in light of that mess that you're just describing, one of the questions came, what do you recommend parents do in terms of, now many of us who are working from home are also part-time teachers by de facto at the moment. And so the question is, what do you recommend parents do in essence? Do we take over their kids' education, even receiving, is receiving some degree of services from the school districts? Are we, how do we, as a parent, take this information and push it back towards our school?
So the first question, of course, is your child in face-to-face schooling or not, right? Because there are very different things here. But overall, my advice, and it's going to be telling what answer you get to this question, is to ask your child's math teacher and your child's English teacher to share with you what the key learning outcome ambition is for this academic year. What are they, right? What are if it's in math, what are the key math skills, right, that the child's being asked to master this year? If it's in English, what are you going to read, right? What is the target for reading for this year? What is the target for writing for this year? Ask them to make this explicit, because in some cases, I understand they're struggling with the technology, they're struggling with COVID, they're struggling with hybrid, and in some cases, they're just satisfied if they get 2/3 of their kids on a screen, right? We just hear horror stories about the fact that 20 minutes is gone before the class even starts. And then it's basically, anything goes. So try to get that thing defined and then ask what materials there are available online, right, for next week's lesson, right, that you can begin to rehearse with your children. If you can master them, great. Some of the high school math may be, beyond me. But where you can, it absolutely helps to know in advance what your child's going to study. But I think that the basic problem here is that there's such chaos in some school districts, such muddle that even that first question can't be answered, right?
Right.
And it absolutely must be and should be. So what you can do as a parent depends on the clarity that you get back from your school as to what the learning goals really are. And if they can't give it to you for the year or even the semester, ask them for it for 2 weeks, right? What are the learning goals for the next 2 weeks? Because again, I can't say this too strongly. Good schools will have an answer to that question. No issues. They have it. They'll shoot it to you. It's written, right? The principal knows it. The teachers know it. And the parents usually know it because it's been shared with them already. Schools that lack good leadership or just, so undersourced and under-resourced and under-led won't be able to answer those questions. And that's a really big red flag that learning isn't happening.
And David, as you talked about, this requires good diagnostics.
Yep, yep, yep.
And being around in this field in the different avenue, but for my professional life as well, I know going through school in the schools of education, when I was going through was, we're going to eschew textbooks, no more textbooks. We're going to go, to source materials, and every teacher is going to make up their own source. And so the shunning of textbooks, and I've seen it in my own kids' education too, has its benefits, sure, in some cases, but it seems to me that there also comes with some challenges there in systemization and so forth. And I'm wondering, could you comment on, as district would try to take a systems approach, a systematic approach to an acceleration model versus a remediation model. We require good diagnostics, we require good curricula. Do we go buy stuff off the shelf? Do we go incentivize, have our own mini race to the top among our teachers to develop it? How do we do that? How do we practically do that?
So there is one thing that over 94% of American teachers do for at least 4, if not 6 hours every week. 94% in math, about 95% in ELA. And it's the one thing that they all do that not one school of education in the United States, not one of the 1,350 odd schools of education, teacher prep programs, has prepared them to do. And what is that? That is, they pull stuff off Google, Pinterest, teachers pay teachers, and they make up their own curriculum. Mm-hmm. They have no training to do that. There's no consistency. And what it means is that your child's education is at the whim of a skill set that no one has prepared your teacher to have. If I can't put it more frankly than that, it's another disaster, right? Along with remediation. So the first step, particularly for your first and second year teachers, who by definition are struggling, and we know this from the student outcomes, I cannot say this too strongly. A decent curriculum that they stick to is going to be better than what they make up. And it's better not only because it's actually been created by people whose job it is to think about this and to do it professionally, but because they can share. Teachers can share lesson plans, share tips, share results across other teachers at their grade level and vertically with other teachers in their subject matter. If they are making it up as they go along inside their closed black box of their classroom, no one can help, right? I mean, you can call your friend and say, oh, I found this great resource. What do I do? Well, the other teacher doesn't have a clue, right? Because it's not part of a curriculum. So a high quality instructional material curriculum, a green light ed report curriculum, is more than just books or problems. It is a learning experience. It helps the teachers as much as the students. It gives teacher tips around what's to be taught. It has diagnostics, it has quizzes, it has tips, it has homework materials. It enables the teacher to be a teacher. Look, when Meryl Streep starts acting in a movie, she doesn't say, I'm not going to act in this movie because I didn't write the script. She wants the best script she can find, right? Written by great script writers. When you start teaching in a school, you should say to the principal, are you giving me the best math curriculum there is in the country? If not, why not? Really, if not, why not? Not, oh, great, there's no curriculum, or the curriculum's the 20-year-old textbook with 400 pages in it. I'll write my own. Bad, bad. Diagnostic comes back with skills that have nothing to do with what you were going to teach. All right. So the diagnostic and the curriculum ought to be seamlessly united. That's why I'm suggesting you use high quality materials that come with their diagnostics. But even if you don't have that, MAP, iReady, these kind of assessments, which are diagnostic, give you results in sub-scores, right, by groups of skills. So they are useful. Even if you don't have curriculum integrated assessments, they're the next best thing because they do show you areas of weakness and need, and they can be compared to your required to be taught skills this year. So again, this all works together. A high quality curriculum, good diagnostics, right? School organized for accelerated learning. Again, it's really tragic that this is absolutely understood by our top performing schools. And I don't mean wealthy schools serving, picket white fence suburban kids. I mean the schools that are doing right by our underprivileged children of color.
And hand in glove with that, the curriculum in the quality there, it seems like there's as to Susan's comment in the chat, and feel free, Susan, to unmute if you want to elaborate on it if I don't catch it. But in addition to the quality of, say, an assessment, there's a frequency aspect to it. It seems implied by acceleration, where if you are indeed taking from where they are for the moment, honing in on the specific skill sets to advance, and then getting them up to speed, you're then at that next step. There's this next step that is probably going to have some gaps, and so we have to do this more of a continuum. And again, from a resources perspective, I hear time, I hear money when I hear that to scale. Mm-hmm. And just thinking through a logical response based on your comment, it's like, well, I'm hearing you say in part, we need to do less better.
Yeah,
we need
exactly.
to deliver less content better.
Less better. And
by doing so, it allows us to take more time invested in these accelerative assessments, and doing more formative assessments rather than,
you got it. Because remember that your gifted and talented students, or for whatever reason, your students who are at the higher end of the achievement curve, can always go deeper, right? In a given topic. They can explore it. They can do associated work. That won't hurt them. It will benefit them, right? As a country, we are a mile wide and inch deep. So giving them more chance at the depth of a topic, great, right? Teaching less, more deeply will benefit everyone. It gives the stronger students the chance to go in deep. It gives the weaker children an opportunity to be accelerated into the entry into that topic, right? And by the way, on cost, there is no cost disadvantage to high quality materials. On the contrary, overall, they're actually cheaper than most of the bad materials. A lot of it is open educational resource, OER, which initially is free, and then you decide what to Xerox, photocopy, whatever. But there was a big study of this, and overall, there is no cost advantage to using bad curriculum. And there's every pedagogical disadvantage.
For those of us, and there's few of us who have been in these conversations who will either listen to the recording or here present, who sort of live in the curriculum procurement world. But could you rattle off some of those sort of qualifying agencies and signals that those of us can jot down for our reference later on?
You speaking to me?
Yes.
Yeah. So Ed Reports, I imagine many people may or may not know of it. Ed Reports is a nonprofit that produces and publishes online for free evaluations of hundreds of curricula. And they have an overall color coding. Red is don't touch, amber is you can do better, and green is yes, these are good materials that are at standard. That is a place to start. We at Johns Hopkins then analyze curriculum for content in ELA, right? What's the actual quality of the materials? And we'd be happy to talk to you and see whether we've done an evaluation of what you're interested in using. But that's a place to start. In terms of what's out there, I don't want to pick favorites, but the kinds that I'm talking about, guidebooks, which is used in Louisiana and elsewhere, now is very high quality. Wit and Wisdom in ELA, very high quality. EL used to be expeditionary learning, very high quality. In math, again, Eureka, disclosure, I launched Engage New York, and Eureka was our math curriculum. But again, all green lighted ed reports. Zern, I've mentioned before, extremely strong. You will be able to look up your curriculum, especially in math and ELA. We're beginning to work in social studies. Ed Reports is just beginning to do science, but in ELA and math, you're well served. You will see, and you can then look at the costs, right? The OER, the non-OER, what the strings are, what the PD is. But to me, the sign of a strong curriculum is not just that it's standards aligned. It's the quality of support it gives to the teachers and the students.
Got it. Thank you. And we had a couple questions coming in specific to our moment. How would you frame this advice for schools doing virtual only education?
Absolutely. So this is an HR problem as much as it is a pedagogical problem. In other words, you've got to have, to make this work, some of your teachers are going to be great at whole class instruction. And they're going to do that 50 minutes online right at 10 a.m. on their grade 7 math curriculum. But what do you do about the kids who need those 3 skills they just don't have? You're going to put them on a different online, not at the same time, but you're going to assign them a tutor, right? An online tutor who may be particularly good at working with small groups, right? You have got maybe somebody who's assigned to worry about their social and emotional health, right, in your school, who's specifically good at that. You may have members of your staff who have time because they're not supervising lunch duty, right, who can be assigned to help. You have to think about online space as, what do we need to get done? Who do we have who has a reasonable skill set? Can we begin to match a more personalized menu, right, where groups of students are given online help so that they can be at that 50-minute on grade level online classroom? And again, I'm sure folks on this who are watching this webinar are shaking their heads and saying, oh my goodness, this sounds like climbing Mount Everest. Actually, if you take a deep breath and you bring your schools together, your staff, your teachers, you calmly speak through the challenge, you speak to people privately online, it can be done. It can and is being done, right? But it takes leadership, no question.
And again, it comes, I keep hearing, working with one of my clients, I'm going back to a meeting when we were doing a strategic plan with the board and going through and talking about, how to augment their new strategic plan. And what we came to is we have to do less.
Yes.
Kind of, because all of this stuff that we talked about adding to do, you talked about we need to do online tutor, we need to set up, small groups and all that. I'm thinking from many folks thinking they're already tapped on their resources of time. And part of the frame of that, David, as I hear, is that when we started having that conversation with one client, somebody finally blurted out the question, but what about the state tests?
Right.
So if we're going to be doing less, but it's going to be better, is it going to look like we're doing worse to our state?
Well, there's 2 parts to that question. 3. One is some states don't want to test for stakes. I think most of the chiefs I've spoken to want to test, right? I mean, I'm in touch with a whole number of state chiefs because of my old role and the work we do at Hopkins. They would like to keep the thermometer. They are more divided on whether it should be for stakes. Those who feel it should worry that if it isn't, no one will care. Mm-hmm. As it is for most children, it doesn't make any difference, right? So stakes, no stakes is about teachers, not children, and schools, not children. That's a whole other topic. We don't incentivize children to do well on assessments. But fundamentally, if we do have the assessment, my guess is that it won't count in the same way that it usually does. That's just my guess, looking at the politics. The second thing to say is that on international tests, where American children are competing with children from 60 other countries, where they've done half as many topics, they do far better than we do, right? I mean, there's just no question about this. This goes back to the mile wide, inch deep. If you have 3 or 4 key math skills to teach this year, that is massively better than 12. And in understanding the conceptual foundation of that math, they will get transfer skills. Your students will understand math better so that they can learn new skills more easily. If they are simply memorizing, right, the equations, they don't have a clue. And this is what, in fact, PISA shows, that when you give them a narrative in English, they can't translate it into mathematics because they haven't understood the basic math. But the last thing I would worry about today is state tests. I don't think anyone's going to give a you-know-what when the results come back.
Sure.
I really don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's, maybe there's a state which will take them seriously and bonk you if your school doesn't do well. I'd be surprised.
Sure. And I'm just hearing, again, like in this conversation of mastery over coverage, I'm hearing mastery on the essentials. Is that
exactly?
Yeah. And the students get good at getting good at something.
Yeah, and that gives a huge positive multiplier effect.
Sure.
Because they're proud of knowing something. They like to know that as soon as you remediate, you embarrass them.
And on this last topic, and Susan, give you the final word here. One of the questions in the comments had to go very specifically on a teaching approach, essentially the flipped classroom. That a lot of instruction now is students are doing some of the learning gains and for homework and spending a lot of time. And if I got your question right, Mark, so please let me know if not. But what are your thoughts about that? The homework concept in?
Yeah, I like it up to a point, but I would say be careful with the socioeconomics here. Let's not close our eyes to reality. In underprivileged, really underprivileged homes, the space, I mean literally the space, the noise, the whatever, to do serious work at home and be ready for that active, engaging discussion with your teacher may be zero. It may actually be zero. And so, this is a place where it's not about remediation. It's about the reality of the capacity for children to work in very adverse, they may be in temporary housing, right? They may be in shelters. They may be in situations of where one grandparent is looking after 6 kids. There's one electronic access to online materials to be shared between the children, right? I mean, be a little careful in context. That's all I would say. In theory, I love it. In practice, it's tricky.
Got it. Yeah. And that I think would apply, what you're saying would apply to homework writ large.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Susan, do you want to say a word?
I just had a really quick question, David. The one point that you raised about resources and curriculum. I know we've talked about it before quite a bit. And there is that question about, well, it's so expensive.
Right.
The cost and resources. And so when we're thinking about the finite dollars that are coming in and that's going to be fluctuating now, because depending on what state you're in, is it PPR, is it taxes, whatever that's looking like, that's going to fund your schools. How do districts make good decisions for purchasing those resources and so that all children have access to them. And
Right. So
and I don't know if you have an answer for that, but when you say it's cost effective, in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, how do we make sure all of our kids that are sitting online and, like you said, have different experiences happening at home, have access to the good quality?
No, it's a great question. I mean, the OER material by definition requires online access, right? Because otherwise there are costs to printing, to getting it physically into the hands of children. Now, there has been a major national effort to equip children with resources. It's by no means fully successful. So this is a district to district issue, right? But in Baltimore, for example, which does use Eureka Math, that is their math curriculum, they are using OER resources because they can't afford massive amounts of printing. They are, for the small number of children with no online access, they are printing those materials. But they start with a big cost advantage because the online stuff, the core materials, are free. And if you're just focusing on a small number of crucial skills, to go back to our main topic, then you are going to focus on just those core materials, not the bells and whistles, right? But it's a fair point, and it's going to be a district to district discussion. And I'm happy if anyone wants to follow up and talk with the three of us or others, right, about your district. I'm happy to engage in that conversation.
Yeah. Well, this conversation has been fascinating, David. I really, really appreciate your time and your expertise and to be honest, the bluntness. I appreciate the getting to the point so that we can have very, very focused conversation, and I think it rings true. So, closing thoughts, David.
Well, I just want to thank everyone. I know your time is valuable. I know you've all got 100 real world problems, right, to solve. I would just say that this is the heart of the matter, right? Everything else we do is in the end about this central point of what are we teaching and how effectively are students learning it, right? And so all of us are serving that goal. I want to thank each of you for the work you do every day to support our children. I'm sure for many of you, this is as difficult and thankless perhaps as it's ever been. So my thanks to you and both to you for organizing this. I'm really appreciative, David, really appreciative.
My pleasure.
And let's meet again.
Yep, sounds good, everybody. And do watch, this is being recorded and will be put up on our website under the publications tab here very shortly. Look for that. Please feel free to share. Everybody have a great rest of your day. David, thank you again.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so
Thanks a lot, David.
Y'all next week.
Yep.